Hi, I'm Michael Chaskelson and very happy to be here to talk about mindfulness for high performance. And to give you some sense in the first instance of how mindfulness is finding its way into all sorts of diverse places and for different reasons, perhaps we can begin by imagining ourselves into this scenario. So imagine that you're a US Marine on checkpoint duty in, say, somewhere like Iraq. And a carload of women and children comes driving towards you at high speed without stopping. And in that moment, you have to make a decision. And the decision you make could have life or death consequences for the people in the car. It could have life or death consequences for yourself and your buddies. It might have massive international diplomatic and political ramifications. And you're just one person needing to make a call. So it's a tough call. And the decision you make in that moment will depend, the quality, at least, of the decision you make in that moment will depend in large part on the quality of your working memory capacity. So working memory is a set of related brain systems that acts like the mind's RAM. It's where information first enters the mind. It's very, very small working memory. It's tiny, it's very short term. But it's, even as I'm speaking to you now, the sounds I'm making are being held in very, very short-term memory and built into words. And then the words are being held in memory and built into sentences. Those sentences then become chunks of meaning, and that meaning is then, as it were, shunted off into other parts of the brain for more detailed processing. So working memory is where information first enters the mind. And it's very, very short term and very, very small. It's only 8 or 9 bits big. Now, the important thing is that working memory is degraded by stress. So when you're feeling stressed, then working memory is ever so slightly smaller. And when you're feeling relaxed and calm and in good shape, then it's slightly bigger. And it's essential, an adequate working memory capacity, adequate RAM, if you like, is essential for effective emotion regulation. It's essential for good decision making, and it's important for innovation and creativity. You know what it's like at the end of a really, really tough week. And you've been working away at something, and a colleague comes, there's been back-to-back meetings, endless phone calls, endless interruptions, constant emailing, and a colleague comes at the end of the week and says, that project we've been working on together, I need a decision now. And you're about to say something really rude and inappropriate, and you just pull yourself back and contain yourself. And what's going on is that you're feeling frazzled. And people familiar with that sense of being frazzled? And frazzled is actually a description of the experience of having an inadequate working memory capacity. That's what frazzle's about. We're not quite up to it. Emotionally, cognitively, in various other ways, we've been worn down a bit. And we're not in the best of shape. We can't think clearly, we don't feel appropriately, etc. So working memory is really, really important. And it's for that reason that the Marines put on a trial to see whether mindfulness training could help people to increase their working memory capacity. Would 8 weeks of mindfulness training help Marines to keep their working memory in good shape? To get a sense of what we mean by it, in the next slide, name the shapes and their colors as fast as you can. Okay. So what you've got here is you've got information and you've got noise. And your capacity to keep relevant information online in the face of competing noise, and even as I'm speaking, there's a third level of noise, so don't try to do this now. It'll make you crazy. If your capacity to keep relevant information online in the face of competing noise is a measure of your working memory capacity. And it's important. So what they did with the Marines was, you're still trying to do this, aren't you? What they did with the Marines was that they divided them in two. So they had one cohort of Marines got the training, the other half got it later. And they did that during the pre-deployment period, in the 8 weeks prior to their deployment to battlefield conditions, which is actually a stressful time for them. They're getting stress inoculation training. Their families and friends know that they're going into harm's way. They know that they're going into harm's way. They're getting up to date with new equipment, and they're getting new equipment issued, and they're getting their inoculations, and it's all tough and difficult. So it's high stress time. So even though they were getting the training delivered to them in high stress time, they had some interesting results. The group of Marines who did the mindfulness training, if they did more than 12 minutes of formal mindfulness practice each day, or at least reported that they did more than 12 minutes of mindfulness practice each day, their working memory capacity increased. Those who did less than 12 minutes of mindfulness practice each day, or who didn't do any practice because they hadn't had the training or weren't complying with the requirement, their working memory capacity decreased because of the stress. A civilian control group who'd got no training, their working memory capacity remained unchanged. So that seems to indicate that people who do more than 12 minutes of mindfulness practice, formal mindfulness practice each day, even if they're doing it under high stress conditions, working memory capacity can be improved. And it had a really, really important effect on these folks. This is what one of the Marines said, having done the training. He said, during my previous deployment, especially after doing multiple missions and being up late, when I'd go out on missions, I'd be so jittery, so fragmented, so ready to pull the trigger, so ready to kill. Without any hesitation, I was ready to go, bloodthirsty, but so amped that there was no control. And thank God, nothing happened. Whereas, after doing the training, this time I was focused, I was watching things, I was much more attentive to people who were around me and what they were doing. Before, it was just a blur. So, for me, this is very much a vindication of the business of offering mindfulness training in contexts such as the US Marines. Believe me, in mindfulness circles, this is hugely controversial, bringing the training into those contexts. But for me, it's sort of a no-brainer, really. If people are running around with high-powered rifles, I'd far rather they were in this mode of mind than in the previous mode of mind. It's pretty simple. So it does seem to make a difference. And I guess it's fairly easy to read across from that experience to your own experience. You know, might this help with the experience of frazzle? And what would that be like? Might it reduce the experience of reactivity and frazzle? And how might that change things? So what is mindfulness? It's a mode of mind, a way of paying attention, a way of working with the mind, a form of awareness. As far as we're aware, it was the form of awareness that was first spoken about by the Buddha 2,600 years ago. We're not aware of anyone having talked about this before that. And for 2,500 years, more or less, it lives primarily in Asian monastic contexts. Mainly because the female monastic order died out after the first 500 years, so mainly it's men, and mainly it's a small elite group of men, because not all monastics by any means practice meditation and mindfulness. So there's a small elite band of meditators keeping this thing alive in Asia. It arrives in the modern era, and in around about the 1970s, it starts to get secularized. It begins to get secularized, and it starts to get applied initially in medical contexts. So initially, it starts to be used to help people manage stress and chronic pain differently. And because the results of those applications turned out to be really, really interesting and fostered a whole bunch of further research, that I get to be here today talking about something that was first spoken about by the Buddha 2,600 years ago? Because there's been a lot of research, and I'll come to that in a moment, that tells us some really, really interesting things about what happens when you work consciously with your mind and your mental states differently. So, mindfulness is a form of awareness that comes from paying attention, choosing to pay attention, so you're paying attention on purpose. And in the present moment, keeping your attention right here, right now, and doing that non-judgmentally. This term non-judgmentally, especially in a law firm, is going to raise questions, I'm sure, immediately. But if you think about what the term judgmental means, that hypercritical, always finding fault, constantly not good enoughness voice. Someone on a recent course described it as the poison parrot on your shoulder that sits there whispering in your ear, you're not good enough, it's not good enough, they're not good enough, others aren't good enough, it's not, you're not right, they're not right, it's not, that constant carping criticism. That's what we're trying to address here. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But let's take these one step at a time. We talk about paying attention on purpose. Now, even as I'm speaking, people's minds are wandering. And no need to feel guilty. Everyone's doing this. Everyone's mind's wandering. So when you go home this evening and someone says, what did you do in the afternoon? And you say, well, I went to this talk on mindfulness and I listened to the guy for about 6 seconds, and then I started to think about that thing I had for lunch and whether we should have that more often at home, and maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. And I thought about that for 7 or 8 seconds, and then I came back to listen to this guy talking about mindfulness for another 8 or 9 seconds, and I was with that. It was kind of interesting. And then I started to think about, what are the implications of this for our holiday next year? Should we go somewhere which is a bit more calming? That would be nice. Why don't we go somewhere which is a bit more spacious rather than the frenetic holidays we tend to take? I thought that would be quite nice. And then I started to imagine the different places where we might go on holiday, and I thought about them for a while. Then I came back into the room and I listened to the guy for another 5 or 6 seconds, and then I started to wonder about that problem that's sitting on my desk, and really, what are we going to do about it? And then I thought through a few solutions, but none of them seemed quite right. And then I came back into the room and I listened to this guy for another 5 or 6. This is right? This is what's going on out there. And it's fine, we're all doing it. It's how our minds work. It's what we do. Now, Microsoft, who are really, really interested in selling our attention span, because they want us to be looking at screens because they can sell screen time to advertisers, are interested in knowing how long our attention span currently is. And recent research published by Microsoft Canada came to the conclusion that in the developed world, our attention span is currently 8 seconds, which is not good news, folks, because goldfish can do 12. And this really isn't good. We used to be better than goldfish. We used to be around about 14 last time Microsoft measured. But, since this, we're constantly fractured. On average, an adult with an iPhone turns it on 80 times a day. That's severe. We don't need to do that. I mean, I'm in this too, right? But 80 times. So we're constantly fracturing up our attention in all sorts of ways. And it's important that we can maintain some degree of sustained attention. You can feel it when someone gives you their attention. And that's great and it feels good. And you know what it's like when you're with someone and they're not giving you their attention. And that doesn't feel that good. And when I was talking to someone, professional services guy who was on one of the courses I run, asked him what brought him there. He said he was with his 11-year-old son who he'd gone to watch play football, and he heard his son talking on the phone to someone else who asked the question, well, is your dad there watching you play football? He said, well, he's there, but not really. And he said, well, yes, he needs to do something about this. So when we're mindful, we pay attention on purpose. We choose where our attention goes, and we keep it there for a bit longer. Now, extending it beyond 8 seconds is not going to be very difficult. Doing it 24/7 or 18 hours, keeping our attention where we want it 18 hours a day, that's harder. But don't worry. The really interesting thing is going for an improvement. So if we can move from 8 seconds to 14 seconds to 16, if we can increase our attention span, that has a significant impact on our well-being, a significant impact on our presence, a significant impact on our relationship, a significant impact on work effectiveness. So when you're mindful, you pay attention on purpose, and you keep your attention in the present moment. You're right here, right now, just with this. Much of the time, our attention's skittering into the future, skittering into the past. When you're mindful, you're right here, right now, just with this. And then there's the question of it being non-judgmental. And here's what this means, really. It means that when we're mindful, we allow what is the case to be the case. We allow what's here to be what's here. What's here right now is what's here right now, and it couldn't be anything other than it is. It really couldn't. This moment's been delivered by history, and it is what it is. We can't go back in history, we can't go back in time and change things so that history would deliver something different. We can't do that, it's impossible. It is what it is. And we spend an enormous amount of our time going, it shouldn't be like this, they shouldn't be like that, I wish I was somehow different, I wish it were somehow different, if only it were like this, why can't it be like that? None of that helps. None of that helps. It's just a massive waste of time. It is what it is. And when you can allow it to be as it is, then choice opens up. Then you can go, here it is, this is what's happened, it's like this, now how am I going to be with this? What am I going to do about this? What's the most appropriate move to make next? But it's only when you can allow what is the case to be the case that you have that choice. If you can't allow it to be as it is, then you're already stuck in relation to it. You've already kind of made a decision. You know, it shouldn't, I shouldn't, they shouldn't, rather than, well, what's going on? Let's look at this. What's the most appropriate move to make now? So, in the first instance, there's this sort of wisdom element to the non-judgmental aspect of mindfulness. We allow what is the case to be the case. The second element of it is that, to some extent, we approach what is in front of us with an attitude of greater kindness, greater goodwill, a willingness to try to bring out the best now, next, for ourselves, for others, for the world around us. What's the most appropriate next move? What's going to really optimize outcomes here for everybody? This is tricky, and I don't underestimate this. One of the things I do sometimes with some of the leaders I work with is we draw a stakeholder map. Think about all the different stakeholders in your life. Think about yourself, a really important stakeholder in your own life, your family, your friends, your colleagues, your organization, shareholders, clients, you know, the UK, the world, the planet, all of these different stakeholders who are impacted by the decisions you make and who are making demands on you, who have requirements from you. And there's this vast web of conflicting, sometimes, stakeholder demands. And you have to try to optimize outcomes across these different competing demands. And what I assert these days is that people who care have a better chance of optimizing outcomes across these conflicting demands than people who don't care. It's really quite simple. If you care, if you can be bothered, then you stand a chance of being able to bring about the best outcome at any one moment. And if you don't care, if emotionally you can't be bothered, then you stand less of a chance. And one of the things I think that really undermines that capacity to care is stress and an overstretch, and we'll come to that later. But mindfulness training, I believe, enables a greater possibility of actually caring enough to be bothered, to try to optimize outcomes, try to make things better now, for whoever's making those demands. Tricky. So paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Now I realize in what I've just said, I've set a bar quite high. And actually what I'm really interested in is that we can improve a little bit. And if we can go for 10%, 15% improvement in any of these domains, that's going to be massive. Before I move on, any thoughts or questions on any of that? Anything bothering anyone?
What am I going to say now when I can't get, am I bothered? I've got to care.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, quite. Okay, so this is how come I'm here, more or less, I think. These are peer-reviewed publications per year, just to give it a little bit more credibility to what I'm saying. So when I first started to practice mindfulness back in 1974, there was no science around it here. No one had studied outcomes, and there was no credible science. We just thought it was good. We enjoyed the experience, got a lot from it personally, did it. I did it pretty much, I've been practicing pretty much full-time in Buddhist context for a long time, up until around about here, when I went off to do a master's degree in the clinical applications of mindfulness. This was the first master's program that had been set up anywhere in the world. And at that point, there were 44 peer-reviewed papers published, and I thought that was really, really fantastic, really, really extraordinary that scientists were taking this seriously, and there was good data, enough data to convince the editors on peer-reviewed journals. And we could read all those papers, and we thought we were on top of the subject. Now there are papers coming out at the rate of more than 50 a month. And it's massive, the amount of research that's showing up. So this is just in sort of secular mindfulness training. And as a result of this vast body of research, there are things that we think we can assert fairly confidently. We can assert that mindfulness training increases personal resilience. I think that's now absolutely uncontested. There are really, really strong associations between mindfulness training and significant structural changes in the brain. So, for example, there's evidence that 8 weeks of mindfulness training correlates with increases in brain grey matter density in areas connected with sustained attention, emotion regulation, perspective taking. There's evidence that 8 weeks of mindfulness training increases activation in the left prefrontal cortex, reduces activation in the right prefrontal cortex. This left prefrontal activation is associated with approach modes of mind, moving towards, interest, curiosity, engagement, kindness. Right prefrontal activation, fear, disgust, anxiety, aversion. So when you're trained in mindfulness for a bit, you're more inclined to move towards with curiosity and interest, less inclined to be fearful. Decreases activation in the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, which keeps us a bit anxious and on edge. That just calms down a bit. Increases the wiring, it seems most recently, between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, which means that we're more able to control what's happening back there and calm our sense of threat by thinking differently. It changes activation in the insula, which gives us more of a stronger sense of our own bodily experience in the moment, and is very, very important for empathy. So in a whole range, and this in many, many, many more ways, we now can say that mindfulness training, working consciously with your attention, structurally changes things, functionally changes things, if you do it over time, and changes things in desirable ways, which is wonderful. So it's no longer just a matter of opinion or a matter of faith, it's now kind of science, which is lovely. Okay, shall we do a mindfulness practice? Yeah, enough talking. Fabulous. Okay, so let's do our first mindfulness practice. And let's do a sensing practice. So we're just going to pay attention to our senses. So here's a thought. There's a part of the brain, a whole bunch of related brain circuits, which come under the common name of the default mode network. It's a network of brain systems which are the default mode. It's where the brain goes by default. So when you're standing waiting for a train, all that chatter that's going on, constantly going on, that's the default mode network at work. Okay? It's just where the brain goes, what lights up when we're not making any other demand on the brain, on the mind, you could say. So that constant inner chatter we have, that's the default mode network. And very, very often, especially in the 21st century in organizational life, it's going to be thinking, planning, thinking, planning, thinking, planning, thinking, planning. That's the default. Running. Now, there's another way of experiencing, and this is sensory. Just paying attention to our senses, to what's here right now coming at us from all of our senses. Not just sight, smell, taste, touch, but also our kinesthetic sense, the feeling of the body movement, or our proprioceptive sense, the feeling of the placement of our limbs, or a chronoception, the feeling of time passing. All these different senses that we have, interoception, the feelings of hunger or whatever, all these different ways of sensing directly, experiencing directly, right here, right now. I know what I'm feeling, I know what I'm sensing, I know that I'm hungry, I don't need to think. I know I can feel that I'm hungry. I'm not right now, by the way, but if I was, I could. I know that I'm not hungry. Yes, he did it. He got there eventually. I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel that directly. I don't need to think about that. So this direct sensing is something that gets less attention from us than thinking, than the default mode network. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is to pay attention to sensing, and I'll guide that. Okay. So you could begin by just paying attention visually. So noticing perhaps the variety of colors in the room right now. Just looking around and picking up color. And just noticing color. Maybe seeing if you can find any yellow. Not a lot of yellow around. But just looking around and noticing yellow if you see it. And then maybe looking for red. And just noticing red. And shades of red. And then look at texture for a bit. So just noticing the texture on people's heads, often called hair. And noticing the variety of textures. So many different textures. And then shifting to another sense. So let's just feel the sense of contact where feet meet floor. Touch, pressure, contact. Any warmth, any coolness, just noticing that. And then feeling body in contact with chair. And again, just sensing the variety of experiences there. moving to sound, and just listening out now to the soundscape that we're in, quite steady but with occasional highlights perhaps, occasional pings or changes in the rhythm of sound, the fabric of sound. Okay, so thank you very much. So a few moments of mindfully sensing and really keeping our attention quite consciously with something where we're choosing to place it, and exploring sensing for a bit. So what was that like? What sort of experiences showed up for people doing that practice? Found it relaxing. Isn't that interesting? It didn't last very long, but you found it relaxing. Yeah. That's again something we heard this morning in the room. The first comment was, yeah, that was relaxing. And it didn't take us long. That was just a few minutes. But what we did was we shifted the attention from the default mode network, which keeps us a bit cranked, into another mode of sensing. And we could calm for a little bit. Some of us, anyway, I'm sure. Any other experiences?
It held my attention.
So it kept your attention. Yeah, so there was something to keep your attention on, and you got interested in that enough, at least, to let your attention rest there for a bit, and it didn't go charging off. Lovely, thank you. Yeah.
It made us pay attention.
It got you to pay attention. It got you to pay attention on purpose. So you're beginning to become mindful. Yeah. Right here, right now. So we're paying attention on purpose in the present moment. And I'm guessing to some extent it's non-judgmental. We're just noticing what's here. We're not having to chatter about it or criticize it or get whatever. We're just noticing. Just open-minded attention in the present moment. So we've all had some experience then of what it feels like to be more mindful. Yeah, lovely. Interesting. And isn't it interesting how rarely we find ourselves dropping into this space, even though it's right here? That was nothing. Not rocket science, no big deal. It's right here, we can do that. But we tend not to. And one of the reasons we tend not to is because of the issue of automaticity. We tend to run our lives more or less automatic. Much of the time we're sort of on kind of automatic. So we get up in the morning and we start going through our morning routine, and then we leave the house and we come to and we're just running on automatic. How many people here have driven, say, 30 miles down a motorway and gone, how did I get here? Yep, we've all done it. Isn't that interesting? That we've got this capacity to do really complicated, even lethal tasks automatically. So you're driving down the M6 and you're a good citizen, so it's 72 miles an hour, more or less. Let's just presume. And left-hand lane, there are trucks thundering along at 60 miles an hour. Right-hand lane, there are people doing 100 miles an hour, whatever. Slightest twitch in either direction and you cause absolute carnage, and it doesn't happen. And you're doing that while thinking about a presentation that you need to give to a group of senior colleagues later in the day, while wondering about whether to book a holiday in the sun this year or should you keep it back and go skiing later on, and wondering whether, if you won the lottery, would you show up at work, all these sorts of things. And you're doing all of this while engaged in this lethal activity, and everyone out there is doing the same thing, and it works. So we've got a tremendous capacity for doing even complicated and dangerous stuff automatically. When we were first starting to drive, we couldn't do that. You get into the car, sort of figure out how to turn on the engine, try to figure out which is the brake, which is the accelerator, and someone says to you, oh, it's a really lovely day again. And shh, just leave me alone. I've got to concentrate. This is important. But after a while, it doesn't take long, and we automate the process, and off it goes. And that's how things go for us. We learn how to do things, they become automatic, and we no longer pay attention. And more of our lives start to be automated. Stuff we stop paying attention to, we stop noticing, we stop giving any attention to. And we run any number of scripts that we've learned about how to do this and how to do that, how to do the other, and it's all automated. And the result is that we miss things. And we miss stuff like the feeling of the cool breeze in the morning that just hits your face as you step out the door, that gives you a sense of being an embodied, alive human being. But you miss it because by that stage you're doing your to-do list for the 4th time. Or, that lovely dog that you pass on the road on your way to the train, that's giving you a friendly greeting, who you just kind of ignore because by then you're doing your to-do list, obviously, for the 7th time, and it's really important, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many things that we miss that could just give us a sense of being alive, human, awake, engaged, but we're just doing the default mode network. We're not really there. And in many respects, then, we increasingly start to live our lives as if we're not there. So we miss stuff, and some of what we miss is really important. Some of what we miss, yes, could increase our sense of well-being and our feeling of vitality. That's great. Some of what we miss is more critical than that, like the tone of voice that your kid's using over breakfast that says they're being bullied at school and don't know how to talk about it at home. But we're just doing family breakfast on automatic. Or the glance in a colleague's eye in the morning when you come into work that says there's something really important going on in their personal life. They wish they could talk to someone about it, but you miss it because you're saying hi to your colleague on automatic. Or that moment in a negotiation where it might have gone this way rather than that way, but you miss it because you're on automatic. So when we're on automatic, we miss things. And some of what we miss is important. Now, it's really good and important to be on automatic because it saves energy. And it's really good to be able to come out of automatic when you need to come out and to pay attention. And mindfulness training is about the skill of coming out of automatic a bit more frequently. That's what it's about, just stepping out of automatic and into mindfulness, paying attention. And for me, the most sort of compelling reason why I do this stuff is because there are people who think that we only really fully pay attention, the way we did during that mindfulness exercise, for maybe 10% of the time. I mean, it's very hard to quantify this, but let's take that as a possibility. Let's say that only really 10% of the time are we paying attention fully in the moment. Now, if that's the case, I'm 62, and Aviva think I'm going to die at 89. That's the bet they're taking on my pension, right? So that means I've got 27 years left, according to them. If I'm only present for 10% of the time, that means 2.7 years. This is not good, folks. If I went to the doctor and he said, well, you've got 2.7 years, it seems, according to our actuarial tables or whatever it is, or there's some stuff we can do about this. I said, give me the stuff. I'm up for that. So, yeah, let's do something about it. And if I can increase my 10% presence to 20%, to 30%, 20% would be 5.4 years. That's better. 40%, yeah, I'll be around for 11 more years. I'm up for that. Great. So it's about being alive when you're alive. It's about really being alive when you're alive. And I think it's worth the investment in time of 10, 20 minutes a day. That's another story. I spoke about mindfulness as about choosing to pay attention, coming away from the default mode network. Now, I could just leave the room at this point and say, just do that, folks, you'll be fine. But it's not as simple as that. The default mode network is the default mode network because it's so deeply habituated. So in order to develop the skill of coming away from it, we need to begin to set some other processes in train to gently counter that habit and to build some resourcefulness around coming away from that habit. And one of the most powerful ways we know of doing that is mindfulness meditation practice. Now, it's not the only way of developing mindfulness. It's really, really important that you recognize that there's a difference between mindfulness and meditation. Meditation is a methodology whose intention is to build the capacity for mindfulness. But there are other methodologies as well. There are other things you can do as well. We could maybe talk about some of those later. But meanwhile, it'd be interesting to experience mindfulness meditation because it's known to be so powerful and also because it illuminates the issue, I think, very clearly. We start to see the mind at work when we really close down the senses to some extent. So we close our eyes, we choose to place our attention somewhere quite subtle, and we try to keep our attention there with that experience. And then the default mode network kicks in. We start thinking, planning, imagining, dreaming. Then we notice, this is the key bit, we notice what we're up to. We see the mind at work doing its habitual stuff. And in that moment of seeing, we're mindful again. So we see that the mind has wandered off, and then we unpick it from where it's gone, place it back, in this case with the breath, say. We follow the breath, then it wanders off, we've become unmindful again, we've lost it again, we lose it. Then we become mindful somehow and we notice what's going on. And in that moment of mindfulness, we choose to bring our attention back. We keep it there for 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 4 breaths, we lose it again. That's fine, we've lost it. We just... And then we notice and bring it back. So in this way, we're beginning to work that attentional muscle of noticing mindfulness, noticing unmindfulness, and working around the territory. Should we do that? Cool. So, a bunch of leaders at Davos at the World Economic Forum doing exactly what we're going to be doing, as they have been for the last 4 years, and at very, very popular sessions. So there's nothing wrong with sitting in chairs, it's perfectly fine. All those images you have in your mind, which are a copy editor's fantasy of people in leotards floating above tropical beaches, cross-legged and in bliss, they don't exist in reality. This is the reality. Just people sitting upright. You could let your eyes close or leave them open if you prefer. If you prefer to leave them open, just letting your gaze be softened. And beginning by bringing attention to sensing. So we'll start with feet on floor. Just sensing that contact, feet on floor. Touch, pressure, contact. Maybe some warmth, maybe some coolness. Maybe not. There's nothing you should be experiencing here. There's just what you are experiencing. So just noticing. And then becoming aware of the pattern of sensations that occurs where your body meets the chair. So feet on floor, body on chair. Now moving attention to the breath. And just beginning to explore the sensations that come with each in-breath and the sensations that come with each out-breath. So there might be a sense of slight stretching at the belly as the air comes in, or a sense of gentle release as it goes out. There might be a sense of slight tickling at the nostrils, or maybe not. There might be a sense of movement at the ribs. There's nothing you should be sensing, there's just what you are sensing. Just noticing. Feet on floor, body on chair, breathing. Each in-breath, each out-breath. Each in-breath, each out-breath. And when the attention wanders, it's not a mistake. It's just what minds do. Just noticing where the attention went and then gently, kindly drawing it back to the breath. And if your attention wanders off 100 times, that's fine, just bringing it back 100 times. Each in-breath, each out-breath. Just following the breath. Just breathing. And when the attention wanders, just noticing, just seeing where it goes. And gently, kindly drawing the attention back to the breath. Each in-breath, each out-breath. And beginning to bring this short practice to a close now, taking your time. There's no rush, but when you're ready, in your own time, opening your eyes, coming to move. And just giving yourself whatever time you need to readjust to being in the room with colleagues. It can take a bit of time to make the shift. So don't rush it. Okay, so lovely. What sort of experiences showed up there? What did people find? Nearly fell asleep. I was kind of betting with myself that we'd hear more about falling asleep in this session than we did this morning's session. Yeah, it looks like I'm about right. Yeah, I win that bet, yes. A couple of things. One is, yeah, we've just had lunch, some of us. So we're likely to be a bit tired end of the week. But also most of us aren't getting enough sleep. Generally, it's an issue in the workplace today. Really important to get more sleep. Put your phone onto night shift if you've got an iPhone. Really important. But I used to tell people in my classes that if you're falling asleep, just open your eyes, sit more upright, breathe more deeply. I don't do that anymore. Now I say if you find you're falling asleep, have a sleep. You need it. Sleep for a few minutes and then wake up and continue with the meditation.
Is it not supposed to relax you, though?
It can do. It can relax you. It's not the intention. So the intention is that you become more mindful. Now, for many of us, greater mindfulness is associated with states of calm and relaxation, and that's great. But that's not really the intention is to be more mindful. So that's really what we're after, wakefulness, mindfulness. The capacity just to know what's going on right now. Because you might find that you close your eyes and you're just confronted with a turmoil of stuff going on. Because that's what's happening right now. And if you sat there thinking, this isn't working, I'm not calm, you're kind of missing the point. What is most pertinent right then is that you notice what your mind is up to. You see what's happening. You're experiencing your mind directly. It's like this right now. In that moment of seeing it's like this right now, you are mindful. And that's the point. Now, you might choose to do something about that. That's another issue. But at least you know it, you feel it, you experience it directly, and that's the point. And it's by noticing what our minds are up to that we start to get choice around how to work with what's there. But it's the seeing which is the really key piece. Thanks for that.
It never ceases to amaze me how still people are. If you said to somebody, sit, you don't move a muscle for 10 minutes,
Yeah.
you'd all twitch all over the place.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
seem to must move.
No. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. We have a capacity for sitting still and for paying attention. It's underutilized. But if we're fighting with ourselves, trying not to move, we've lost. So if I were to say, just sit still and don't move, then people starting to fight with themselves to not move, then we're at odds with ourselves. And that's really a key piece around mindfulness, is that it's not about fighting with yourself. It's the exact opposite. So, the mind's wandering, and then we can get into I shouldn't be, and you're into a fight that just produces agitation. So, trying not to do that. Anything else?
Strange when I opened my eyes how the room suddenly came to me.
Yes.
Really weird.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it was like,
This is where I am. Wow. Yeah. So we can really reduce sensory input just to something simple, and then say, whereas how huge and complicated our ordinary sense experience is. And so, in its fullness, there it is. Wow. Yeah. So some of the time, I guess, if you're going to take this up, just making those transitions a bit more gently is something that you can begin to do.
I think I'm thinking practically, how can I apply this?
Yes.
So how often and whereabouts?
Yes. These are really important questions. Well, what we get from the Marine study is those Marines who said they did more than 12 minutes of mindfulness training each day had an increase in their working memory capacity. That's probably an average, so who knows what they were actually doing. So that some of the time they were probably doing a bit less than that, some of the time they're probably doing a little bit more than that. It was varying a lot, and it's what they said, which is probably different to what actually happened. But the implication is that if we can think about that as, let's aim for, say, 10 or 12 minutes a day, or maybe 10 to 20, something like that, finding some part of your day where that's possible. And for some of us whose lives are more or less routine, that's easier. For some of us whose lives are less routine, it's trickier. Maybe some part of your day where you might be able to just imagine carving out, say, 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that. I'm going to share some audio resources later, and there are these various resources that Yvonne shared as well, that you can, find out more stuff. So there's guided meditations out there. If you can get them onto a phone, or just put some earphones in and listen to some audio guidance for a while, and just do some regular practice, that can be very powerful. Does that answer the question to some?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't know whether it was like a minute here and there to do it.
No,
You
yeah.
feel like you need to. Or
Yeah.
you should do a block.
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Well, there's two differences, really. One is I'm going to share a single-minute meditation later, which is really helpful for just changing mode in the moment. But that doesn't change functional connectivity in the same way. It doesn't do the bigger piece of rewiring the brain and building resourcefulness in quite the same way. So my recommendation, if you're up for it, is to do both. Bits here and there through the day as needed, and then a regular formal piece if you can. But look, there's another piece here that's not just about meditation. It's about having moments where you move away from the default mode network consciously. So it's choosing to pay attention to your sensing when you can. If you're feeling a bit frazzled, going over to the window and looking at the sky and the birds, the seagulls out there, for 30 seconds can change things. If you're feeling a bit frazzled, getting up and choosing to go for a walk to another part of the building to get a cup of decaf coffee, because you're feeling frazzled. Believe me, it makes a difference. And actually, don't take your phone with you. Keep your eyes down so you don't get intercepted by colleagues. Or here's another one that I find quite helpful. This is on silent mode right now. Oh. So you don't have to be available. Yeah. And just choosing to pay attention to the feeling of walking. That sort of thing. So coming into sensing and away from thinking from time to time makes a real difference. It's really refreshing. Anything else?
What about reading it before sleep?
Really, really valuable before sleep. It can really help you to sleep better. The trouble is very often that just before sleep we tend to fall asleep, so we're not getting the full benefit of the practice. But it can as well be a really helpful introduction to sleep, especially, that 3 a.m, constantly the thought pump just going and going and going and going. It can really help with that, especially paying attention to your body. Just moving away from that constant, compulsive thinking into direct sensing is really useful. There's a meditation amongst the ones that I'll be sharing called the body scan, where you move your attention consciously through the body. That's very helpful. So here's what happened during that meditation. We did a lot of remembering and forgetting, I imagine. Those of us who weren't sleeping all the time did a lot of remembering and forgetting. So I give an instruction, follow the breath, and we're paying attention to the breath. And it's very easy to think that because I've given this instruction, if you're keeping your attention in this bandwidth, you're doing it right. But if your attention goes outside of this bandwidth, you're doing it wrong. But that's not the case. That's not the intention here. Yes, this is a guidance, but I'm not suggesting that if your attention goes outside of that bandwidth, you're doing it wrong, because this is what everyone's attention does. It's just the case. So you set out to pay attention to the breath, and you follow the breath for 2, 3, 4 breaths, and then you forget, literally forget to pay attention to the breath. Something else takes your attention, and off your attention goes. And then you remember that you're meant to pay attention to the breath, that you are meaning to pay attention to the breath. And in that moment, you become more mindful, and you bring your attention back to the breath. It turns out not to be difficult to do. And you're paying attention to the breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 4 breaths, and then you forget. And off your attention goes. And then you remember, forget, remember. And each time you forget is an opportunity to remember. And each time you remember, it's as if you're laying down tiny deposits in the neural pathways that are connected with sustained attention, sustained intention, and a set of desirable attitudes. Now let's see if this is working. I did it. There's an animated slide next, which constantly betrays me. Let's just see if it works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It has a mind of its own. So we set out to pay attention. That was a little moment of excitement. We set out to pay attention. And then we forget to pay attention, then we remember to pay attention. Then we forget to pay attention, then we remember to pay attention. We set out with the intention of doing a meditation. But we think, oh, here's some empty space, I'll do some planning, right? So we sit there and we plan and we plan and we plan, and then we remember our intention and we come back to that intention. We stay with that intention. Then we forget that intention and we do a little bit of dreaming, and then we remember our intention and we come back to our intention. We set out to do this with an attitude of kindness, curiosity, openness, interest. But very soon we start getting cross with ourselves and get irritable with ourselves. Why can't I do this? It's not rocket science. I should be able to keep my attention. Blah, 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 blah. And then we remember the attitude and we come back to, it's okay, allowing, let it be, pay attention to ourselves in a different kind of way. So this way, time and time and time again, we're getting to exercise the capacity for sustained attention, sustained intention, and a set of desirable attitudes. Now, if you do that 10, 15 times in a session like this, and then you go away and forget about it, it doesn't change anything. The next set of habits will just override that. But if you were to do that 10,000 times, that coming back, then you're really beginning to build new neural resources. You're engaged in significant retraining, restructuring of your brain and of your experience. So 10,000 moves would be great. It really does build capacity. But it's about constantly coming back. So this isn't about, just getting really, really good at following the breath. That is a fundamentally uninteresting skill. I did some great mindfulness training. I really learned how to follow my breath. Oh, yeah, wow, well done. That's great. I mean, it's really uninteresting. But learning how your mind works where your attention tends to go, learning to regulate your mind and your emotions differently, learning how to see a thought as a thought, to unpick from the thought, to place your attention somewhere else, to keep it there, to move around your inner landscape a bit more at will. That's really much more interesting. That's empowering. So it's not about getting good at following the breath. It's about becoming more mindful and more choiceful around how your attention moves. This here is the pressure performance curve. And this describes a truth of all living things. There's no organism is exempt from this curve. Everything that lives is subject to it. So if you're growing sweet peas indoors right now because you're not quite sure the frosts have passed, and you stroke your hands over the surface of the pea shoot tray of seedlings every day, they will grow stronger. And it's not because they love you and want to be with you and really enjoying the contact. It's because you're subjecting them to a challenge. So you're just agitating their cells and so on, and they're developing stronger stems, stronger roots, stronger leaves. It's great. If, on the other hand, you were to whack your hand first firmly down upon them, you would kill them all. So a certain amount of challenge is good for us. Too much challenge is really, really bad for us. So in this part of the pressure performance curve, there's not enough challenge, not enough interest, not enough engagement, and we're bored, disengaged, can't be bothered, not good for our health, not good for our well-being. In this part of the curve, there's a lovely balance between the demands that are made on us and our capacity to respond to them, and we do really, really well. In this part, we're starting to get stressed. The demands that are made on us exceed our capacity to respond, and this is not a bad place to dip into from time to time. It's a bad place to live. It's a bad place to spend too much time. So if we spend too much time in this part of the curve, then that will shorten our lives. No doubt of that. Here lives cancer, heart disease, diabetes, musculoskeletal disorders, digestive disorders, sleep disorders, mood disorders, and so on. It's really, really bad to spend too long here. It's not a bad place to visit. It's not a good place to live. And it's really valuable to be able to work this part of the curve, to notice the signs that you're getting stressed, to have the sort of sensitivity and internal awareness to notice that your digestion's starting to go. You can feel it. Or to notice that you're getting a bit snappier. Or to notice that your sleep's starting to get a bit more scattered. Or to notice that your shoulders are up by your ears, or your jaw's been clenched for 3 days, or you've just been unable to shift these headaches, or whatever it is. To notice, to pay attention, and to have something you can do about that. One of the things you can do about that is just using these little 1-minute meditations I'll teach them. They're not, a wonder cure for stress, but they help, some of the time. But the really, really important thing is to notice what's going on, to be realistic about what's going on, because there's this other part here, which is the place of delusion. And in the place of delusion, you go, it's okay, I'm doing fine. I can manage, I can cope, I'm really good at this. But in fact, the reality is your performance is down here. The story you're telling yourself, your colleagues, your people, everyone else, is it's okay, I can keep on doing this, but the truth is it's not. The truth is it's down over here. And although a bit of time spent here can maybe build more stress hardiness, it might be able to shift the curve to some extent, and we've all got different shape curves, and they probably will go all over the place, but none of us is a Superman, none of us is a Superwoman. Everyone is subject to this curve one way or another. So noticing what's going on for you and being proactive about that, choosing to do it differently, is really, really important. Having some things you can do to work this differently is really, really important. Just not much longer now, but I wanted to talk about the 3 emotion regulation systems. So this is one view of how our emotions come to us. This is, presented by evolutionary biology theory. This is theorized by evolutionary biologists who suggest that there are 3 primary emotion regulation systems. And we get them from evolution. The blue system, which is driven by dopamine largely, is our reward-seeking system. And at its most primitive, this is the desire to get a mate, procreate, feed your family, successfully pass your genes on. That's at its most primitive. These days, it's much more complex than that. But it's about our desire to do well, to thrive, to succeed, in whatever way that shows up for us. So the blue system is our desire to do well and to be seen to do well, to be seen to do okay. That's the reward-seeking system. This is familiar flight, freeze system, which is predominantly driven by adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, familiar place. And this green system, the calm and connect system, serotonin, oxytocin, vasopressin are some of the main players in that system. Now, the theory here is that your emotional life will be one or another cocktail combination of this stuff. And so, for example, if you're feeling that feeling of being completely in love, you'll have high levels of dopamine, high levels of serotonin, high levels of oxytocin present at that time. And I don't want to be very reductive and say all of our emotions are just chemical combinations. I'm not interested in being that reductive. But certainly, when we're experiencing different emotions, there are also different chemical combinations present. We get all this stuff from evolution, and it's worked really, really well to produce our lives today. It's a successful system, but it's not adapted to modern circumstances. So I'll give you a for instance about how this is. Now, evolution's been going on for millions of years to produce human beings. But for the last 50,000 years, there's been barely any change. So let's imagine that 50,000 years ago, we're living here, on this spot. So there are perhaps up to 50 of us living in a band, in a clearing in the Birmingham forests, which aren't yet called Birmingham, but nonetheless exist. And inside the clearing, it's safe, more or less safe. Outside the clearing, really not safe. If we met another human being outside the clearing, they'd probably want to kill us. We'd probably want to kill them. If we met a wild animal outside the clearing, it might want to kill us. We'd certainly want to kill it. So outside of the clearing, it's a slightly more dangerous place. It's a very much more dangerous place. But this blue system wants to get us out there to feed the family, pass on our genes, do all the good stuff, succeed, do well. So off we go, outside of the clearing, into the dangerous place, to forage, to hunt, find berries, find roots, kill an animal. And we're outside doing our stuff in the dangerous place, doing our work, and we suddenly get a sense that there might be a bear behind that tree. Wind's blowing from the bear to us, so right now we're okay, but what's the first thing we do? We freeze. Don't want to alert the bear to our presence. And all this stuff flares up immediately. Large muscle groups. Adrenaline raises the heart rate, raises the blood pressure, pumps the large muscle groups of blood ready to fight or run away. Noradrenaline doing something similar. Cortisol's flooding the system, getting us ready to be rapidly activated in case we need to fight and run. It's thickening our blood, and it's an anti-inflammatory, which is great. It's undermining our immune system, but it's really not important if we get flu next week. Right now, there's a bear. That's the important thing. Non-essential neural circuits have completely shut down. We don't want to be sitting there thinking, does energy really equal mass multiplied by the speed of light squared? If there's a bear behind that rock, we really need to do what we know how to do. Fight, run. Our digestion digestion shut down, our musculoskeletal system's gone completely tense, we're really ready for action. So we escape from the bear. The system does its thing. We take the food we've gathered back to the family campfire. We're sitting with our people, we're calm, we're connected, we're happy, we're feeling creative, feeling resourceful, feeling in a good place. People are making up songs and dances about our legendary escape from the bear. We're becoming a legend in our own lifetime. It's really, really wonderful. We've done well. So that's the system doing what it's designed to do really, really well. Move forward 50,000 years, and you're sitting at your desk in Birmingham at an office, and you get an email from a colleague. That project we've been working on, I said I'd give you a decision at close of play on Friday. I can't. Oof. Immediately, threat, bang. What am I going to do about this? This whole thing flares up. So adrenaline floods the system. The large muscle groups pump with blood, ready to fight or run away. Cortisols thickened our blood and sent these anti-inflammatories racing around the place, which is great if someone's going to come into the office and bite you, but it's actually undermining your immune system right now. Your digestion shut down. You've gone completely tunnel visioned. You can't think clearly. All you know how to do is fight, run. This is not a good place to be in that moment. This is really, really unhelpful in that moment. So this got us here. Millions of years of evolution got us here. Right now, we need to find a way of working with it more consciously and more intelligently. So here's the thing. We can use practices like mindfulness to help us to negotiate this axis. We can use it to help us to move from the red into a green space and how to calm more consciously. So you notice yourself tensing. Take a breath, take 2 breaths, take 3 breaths, calm. Recognize the need for calm. Don't fire off an angry email. Don't fire off an angry email. Calm, think, settle. Now, what's the best way of dealing with this situation? Okay. What's going to be smart right now? Okay. Just calm. Right. Let's do it like this. So when we can manage this system better, when we're less reactive and more responsive, then things go better generally for us. And here's my case, really. I'd suggest that we can do our blue reward-seeking work more from the green zone, less from the red zone. Yes, we will get red, no doubt. That's life. But if we have a bit more green, a bit less red, things go better for everyone. They go better for our people, for our clients, for the planet. A calm and considered response is far better than a reactive response. And, anger, sometimes useful, but often not. Okay. So to manage this better, you could do a 1-minute meditation from time to time. So if you've only got a minute to change mode before a difficult meeting or after a difficult phone call, or when you've arrived home so that you want to leave work behind and join the family in a different mode of mind, you can do a 1-minute meditation. In order to do that, it's useful to know how long a minute lasts. So I'll give you a methodology for doing that, of timing a 1-minute meditation. So getting upright and settled. What we'll do now is we'll begin to meditate, and very soon I'll say start. And when I say start, begin to count your breaths at the end of the out-breath. So you breathe in, breathe out, count 1. Breathe in, breathe out, count 2. Breathe in, breathe out, count 3. After a minute's passed, I'll say stop, and if you remember the number you stopped on, that's how many breaths you take in a 1-minute meditation. Okay, so just settling and following the breath. Just finding the breath. Start. And stop. And remembering the number you stopped on. And that's how many breaths you take in a 1-minute meditation. So if you lost that, you can always do it again with a smartphone timer. It's easy. So before a difficult phone call, you could do a 1-minute meditation to get yourself ready for that. Or if you're feeling a bit frazzled at some part of the day and you need to calm, you could do a 1-minute meditation just to change mode. And all sorts of places you could do it. If you sprinkle a few through your day, it can make a difference. Next steps, I'd suggest, do read my book. I've got to plug that. My publishers wouldn't be happy if I didn't. Do the mindful minutes a few times a day. That's a good thing to do. And if you want to do more practice, you feel free to download MP3s from that website. It's my site, and you can, that's audio guidance. You could put it on a phone if you care to, and just do some meditations. There's different meditations there. Good, and I believe we'll be sharing the slides. Yeah, great, so you'll get that. Thank you very much, everyone. Good.
I hope you've enjoyed the session today. The context of this is to give you some skills that you can put into practice for yourselves, but also we've had clients also asking about mindfulness. We had Barclays last week putting a request in to see if we did anything around mindfulness, and our clients are asking more and more about it because in the business world it is an accepted technique to manage stress at a senior level. So please keep it in mind, talk about it with your friends and colleagues and your clients. We have got some press releases coming out because, as I say, this is breaking ground, which we're really pleased about. If you have enjoyed the session, do let us know so that we can run it again. If you've got any thoughts, opinions, queries, do let us know as well, because we can change things, improve things, etc. And if there's anything that comes out of the back of this that you're not sure of, please do get in contact, because there is a wealth of knowledge out there and support and information that we can give you. Thank you very much.